Hello, everybody. Well, thank you for watching this movie with us. And we're ready now for the Q&A. Let's see, what can we say about this movie? Obviously, we can approach this film from many, many angles. The legal one, and also the human one, the human aspect of it, and also the universal aspect of this film. Because what happened in Mexico, it also happened in other countries, including the United States. And in some cases, still happens, because as you see, even though something could be legal, but sometimes cultural aspects will prevent that legality to move forward. And sometimes bureaucracy, as we could see in this film, is a key element that groups in power can use in order to put a hold on progress or whatever the law dictates. So, anybody has a question or a comment that would like to present?
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, how are you? I enjoyed the movie a lot, so thank you so much for presenting that, Raul. And I was wondering, while I was watching the witnesses and the moment they were going to get married for the first time, most of the people who were invited were women. So women were the most supportive group for them. And I don't recall any male friend in the group of guests of the wedding. And I was wondering also if that has to do with the male dominant society and culture that I think it's very, very strong in Mexico. Because also the figure of the mayor was a male, of course, and he was totally opposed. He was opposing that marriage. But however, he sends a woman to give the face when all the problems arises. It's a woman that has to assume that role of facing the couple and say, you cannot get married because of these formalities, of course, bureaucracy and other issues. So I was wondering about the male dominant society that it's in Mexico mainly, and the role of women supporting this couple instead of men. And I think that there are some Mexican students in the audience, so maybe they can illuminate us more in that aspect. But I noticed that female role and male dominant culture society.
Yes, that's a very good point, and it's true. Some may argue that it's always women who move forward and help society move forward, and we can connect, certainly, all the human rights struggles, starting probably with racial struggles and equality, and then the feminist movements, and then the GLBTQ rights. I mean, in a way, they are interconnected. But of course, as you said, if there are some students who could explain that or see a different angle to that perspective. I see that a lot of people are muted. I don't know if you can undo it yourself. I mean, I'm having a little bit of technical. I have my Zoom is a little frozen here, and I cannot do much. But those who have an open mic, or those who can open their own microphones, if you could expand that concept about women being, in a way, those who will help and move society forward.
Yes, hi. Is it?
Ashley, hi.
So kind of what she was saying is that I think kind of especially, I'm not Mexican, but I am Latina. So especially in like Latinos, they're expected to be like very like masculine masculine, and they're, you know, that's like the stereotype that's imposed on them. And in a lot of ways, that's what they're raised with, because that's like the machismo that was from their generation. And so kind of for like them to be, I guess, more accepting of like homosexuality or anyone in the LGBTQ community, it raises a lot of questions. Kind of how in the beginning, the lawyer, when he was considering taking the case, he was like, oh, I'm afraid that people will think that I'm gay. I mean, we can see that he, of course, grew out of that and everything, and he came to accept it. But I think that's kind of why it's more women that, like, we move things forward, because maybe, like, we don't have that stereotype imposed on us like a lot of men are, which luckily they're kind of going against that now.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think it's true, because the lawyer expressed his fear, because by defending a gay cause, he might be confused or taken as gay, as if that was something negative. On the one hand, his understanding of the situation, and he feels that it's worth fighting for, and at the same time, he doesn't want to be perceived as being part of the community. And that happens a lot. Even, I don't know if you notice, but in media, actors, sometimes they portray a gay character, and they're very committed to the character, and they're very progressive, and that's why they choose to portray that character. But they always find a way to clarify to the audience that they are straight, if they are straight. And I feel that has to do a little bit with that ingrained homophobia, or the fear of losing opportunities or privileges in society. Yes, that's an excellent point. Any other comments?
Well, I have something to feed off of the first two people who spoke about it always seemed like it's a woman, but like you said, it's usually women, and it's usually people of color in general who always have their back against the wall, that you have nothing else to lose but to fight. I don't care what race you come from, Latino, Hispanic, anywhere, any Caribbeans, whatever, you have a darker complexion, your back is against the wall. You have to fight extra. And when it comes to definitely people of color, the first thing they would say is, oh, he has AIDS, or that person is gay. Everything negative usually comes from Africa. I'm surprised they didn't say Corona didn't come from damn Africa this time. But this is back, the film I saw was in 2013. It seems like times have definitely changed. It's become, you know, to me personally, I wouldn't care what somebody likes behind closed doors. Why would that affect me? And if you think about it, however you say it, or gay, or it's been since the beginning of time. When you go through the days of reading your history with the Caesars, it's like it was nothing to have for one of them to have a 14-year-old with them, and they were a boy. But you know, nobody talks about that, and you know, they were really raping that boy. It wasn't they both agreed to it. It was more so, I have the power, you're with me. So now it's like almost such a sin now for what people are doing when they love each other. But it's just amazing the way it's twisted. Like, why would you care what people like? I think they go on religion. We got to understand, religion, to me, this is my opinion, were good for those days at those times, was the things we follow. Like today, we can't go off of things that happen. Time and people evolve. And I think change is here. It's like, it's nothing to see this stuff on TV and I was one that used to think it was like, oh, no, my kids. But now I have 2 kids, and I'm like, if they told me one day, I'm going to love them the same. I'm not going to care. It is whatever they like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and representation, it's true that it has changed. Even the media representation, you probably remember some sitcoms and the way that same-sex couples or gay characters were represented. It was, I mean, it was in the 90s, for example. I remember there was a lot of fuss and press and about the first lesbian kiss in a show called Roseanne, and you know, now it would be totally nothing, you know, nobody would pay attention to that. But in the 90s, it was a big promotion stunt like they used. And then, of course, Ellen DeGeneres coming out in her show first, and then Will and Grace. So there was a difference in an evolution in representation. That is true. But on the other hand, one thing is what happens on a screen or on TV, and then is the problems or the obstacles that people might find in terms of just in the name of probably, well, sometimes I say religious rights or religious freedom, but it comes to me that case of the baker in Colorado that didn't want to bake the wedding cake, and you know, it seems almost like you say, well, go to another store and buy the cake somewhere else. But the implication is different. It's not that. It's not that, okay, they don't want to offer me service somewhere, I go somewhere else. It's the fact that it attempts against human dignity and equality. And those little things still, even though it is legal, it doesn't mean that people will not find ways, loopholes, ways of expressing their opposition and putting their, you know, their foot down in terms of things that they believe it's not right. And so that's what produces a discussion, right? And I think that is what the movie very eloquently shows, how they were almost, it was almost ridiculous the way that they would have to face this bureaucracy and about things that if you split hairs, maybe there was some point, but you could see that the intention was absolutely to stop, to prevent them from getting married. Any other comments? Those who can talk, because yeah.
Professor Galope, I know you're having problems with your Zoom, but I just wanted to let you know that our guest speaker is in the room.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Cameron. So here for the Q&A, we have Dr. Christopher Salvatore. He's the chair of the Department of Justice Studies. And Dr. Salvatore, his work includes projects examining the influence of emerging adulthood on offending and public perceptions of the criminal justice system. His work explores workplace hostility in higher education and expressions of homophobia in higher education. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Salvatore. And we want to hear your view of this film that obviously approaches this legal battle. And we can approach it from many angles. The human aspect of it, the LGBTQ aspect of it, the legal aspect, or the representation aspect of what happened on the movie. So what's your take?
Well, I think it's a very interesting and powerful film. I think there's a lot of different issues going on. There certainly was the legal battle for rights. There was in Mexico a series of Supreme Court rulings that go back to about 2009 and ended in 2017 that eventually brought up the right for same-sex marriage as well as same-sex adoption and having parents to have equal protection on the rights in Mexico throughout the various states. But as we see in the film, it's a battle. It's a battle for Victor and Fernando to get married and to have legitimacy. And I think one of the most important things that the film does is it conveys the importance of the message for marital rights, for the protections that marriage offer you. There's, of course, the social legitimacy of having, your relationship sanctioned by society. There's also tax benefits and legal benefits to marriage. Being the next of kin, for example, having the right to see your spouse if they're ill in the hospital, things of that nature. So it is really important for people to be able to get married if they choose to do so. it does legitimize these relationships in the eyes of society. And it helps move these couples towards the process of normalization in society, where perhaps over time they'll be experiencing less stigma, less hostility, less victimization of hate crimes, less discrimination in the workforce, be it blatant as it might have been in the past, perhaps a little more subtle or microaggressions as it might be in the present, and hopefully by the future, something that won't be experienced at all, or hopefully on a very small degree.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And besides, something that strikes me is the fact that something could be legal because of struggles and because of the advancement of legislation, but yet sometimes it still remains almost like in the closet, in the shadows. Like I was in Argentina in 2012 when they had the legal battle, the legal debate for same-sex marriage, and it passed, and a lot of people could get married, and that was certainly an advancement. But still, same-sex expressions of affection in public or visibility is not that, unless it is kind of like an entertainment or extreme cases of being flamboyant, but which is okay. But the regular same-sex couple is not that visible. And I wonder if that has to do with culture, or it has to do with if just something because it's legal, then it's open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a couple issues there. So one of I think they overlap very much so. So often, and what we see in a lot of cultures, certainly in the US culture and Mexico as well, is the idea of what's called a cultural lag, where there might be rights on paper. So the right for same-sex couples to get married, for example, or say in the US, the various cases that have protected civil rights on paper for people, but we still see this lingering process of discrimination. In the US, for example, we see institutionalized discrimination in the criminal justice system still, despite a wide number of rulings to protect our citizens against racial and ethnic discrimination, but it still happens. I think specifically focusing on the same-sex issue, we do have on paper this protection for couples to get married. We see in the film the resistance of the court, of various actors within the court, of various members of the public, using a variety of justifications, be it religion, the idea that if there's same-sex marriage, a society will be destabilized, all these sorts of arguments that there's not really any social science to support them. At one point in the film, there's people arguing, well, if they get married, they shouldn't be allowed to adopt or have children. And again, there's no social science that supports the idea that if a same-sex couple adopts or has a child through some method, that there's a negative outcome for the child. But many people might still believe that. So just because we have sort of these protections on paper, or we have the social science or empirical science to support something, it doesn't mean it's worked its way into the public or into the public consciousness enough. And I think that sort of steers into the second thread of your statement, which is sort of this idea of representation in the media. And this was an issue in US popular culture for a long time, and some still might argue today, where in the dawn of television, say in the first 25 years or so, we rarely saw racial ethnic minorities. When we did, they were very stereotypical in nature, or we saw the only Hispanic we saw in the 1950s was Ricky Ricardo. He was an entertainer, and he was not threatening, and he was safe, and he was nice. We didn't really see any other representations. If we saw African Americans in television in the 1950s or 60s, they were typically represented as criminals or in a humorous manner. Mm-hmm. And we saw that with other racial ethnic minorities and groups as well. I think with members of the LGBTQ community in particular, they were either completely invisible in popular culture, or when they were visible, were very stereotypical, either very flamboyant and looking to make makeovers, and either very feminized or very masculinized if they're women, which again might be representing some individual in the spectrum, but not everyone. And most of the time, these characters were on sitcoms. Things like Will and Grace come to mind, which again was very popular in its initial run, had a recent revival as well. Not that Will and Grace in and of itself is a negative thing or a bad thing, but it does sort of lightly touch on things in a very sort of stereotypical manner. Before that, there weren't any long-term representations for the most part. We had public service announcements in the U.S. in the 60s and 70s, which were very negative in nature, often depicted homosexuals as predators, child molesters, sort of those negative stereotypes. When we did see characters, and one comes to mind that was in the 1980s, also a sitcom, was a television show, Soap, which Billy Crystal played a character named Jody Dallas, who was a cross-dressing homosexual, but eventually that character became normalized by making him heterosexual. So we sort of saw these sort of, the popular culture dipping its toe in the water, then dipping it back out, dipping it back in a very safe manner. It wasn't until fairly recently that we're seeing characters that just happen to be gay or lesbian or transgender or non-binary, and they're just there. It's not a big issue that they're, it's not a special episode with the gay cousin or the lesbian couple with their special child type of thing. It's just normalized. And that's something we're starting to see in the US a little bit more in mainstream popular culture. It'll be interesting if we continue to see it. Another thread is, as we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years, are mainstream actors playing gay, lesbian, transgendered roles, but making sure to make the statement that they are heterosexual. We saw that with Brokeback Mountain, which was at the time considered very innovative, but the actors made sure that they were known as to not be homosexuals. We saw that Matt Damon played a gay man, Liberace's lover, and I think Behind the Candelabra was an HBO film, making sure that his fans and the public knew that while he was very supportive and okay with this role, he is of course married, has children, and is a quote-unquote regular person, which again might represent his own insecurities or fear for his own livelihood. So again, sort of progressive, but want to make sure the message is out there that this isn't really him, it's just a character he's playing on TV. So we sort of see the mixed messaging in our mainstream culture.
I think that is a very accurate indicator of how progressive we really are. It's not so much what we show on screen, but actually the justifications behind the screen.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that is something that will eventually change, and I think it's a slow change, but eventually I think it would happen. But at the same time, we should always be on alert that these legal rights that we gain in society, LGBTQ, women, minorities, are not for granted. I mean, and they can be reverted sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it becomes, I think in so many in our department, are focused really on social justice and human rights. And these are really what we're talking about are the human rights and social justice component of these legal victories. Mm-hmm. That even if we have these victories on paper, we have these protections on paper, you can still face discrimination in the workplace, whether it's overt or subtle. You might not experience the type of aggression maybe that you would experience, say, in 1970, but in 2020, you could still experience hostility. It just might be on a micro or more subtle level. So it is still out there. And again, we don't have to look too far in other arenas to see the challenges with race and ethnicity over the summer across the country in the United States. So certainly these are areas of concern in other domains as well.
Yes, absolutely. And also we mentioned the case of the baker and not being willing to serve this same-sex couple with a wedding cake because it was against his religious freedom. We could say the easy solution is let's get the cake somewhere else, but but actually, it's a statement against human dignity. The fact that somebody is refused service because of sexual identity or orientation or race, it's inconceivable, and that is what makes it so unfair, so unjust. Even though the resolution was not too happy.
Yeah. It seems probably for people on the outside, oh, it's not a big deal. Just go to the next bakery or go to the next store. You know, you don't get upset about it. But it is representational of sort of, well, if one person accepts it and is okay with it, you know, the next person might be expected to be. And we should be able to, regardless of our gender, race, ethnicity, age, and so forth, be able to go and buy a wedding cake or buy a pair of pants or go buy a mobile phone or whatever it is without being treated differently. It's an issue of human dignity. It's an issue of personal freedom and personal choice. It's an issue of, you know, it is this common decency as well. And again, that can bleed into issues of, well, we don't rent to certain people. You know, if you're trying to rent an apartment, or if you're trying to buy a car a certain place, or if you have a repair person coming to your home and you're a same-sex couple, they find a reason not to provide you service. So it can go into other arenas that might not seem like a big deal if you're on the outside, but if you're living these things and, you know, your electrician all of a sudden can't work with you because your partner is male or you're a same-sex couple, that is an issue. It can be a challenging thing to deal with.
Yeah. Well, I think this movie helped us see this human case, these two people, which one of the things that a lot of critics say, and I agree, is that the story is so compelling precisely because the characters, which are real life characters in a documentary, are so relatable. It seems as if we had that experience before, or we know somebody who had that experience before in one way or another. And that is what I think that the film speaks to us so deeply, because precisely of that human experience that they're sharing with us. So any final comment about the film and why people should probably consider it, view it, or view it again?
I would absolutely recommend it. I remember, I think it first came out in 2017 in the New York Human Rights Watch Festival, and I actually unfortunately missed it. So this gave me an opportunity to sort of take time out of my day, sit down and watch it. And what I loved about it is it's a very human story. We're seeing really first and foremost a couple who just wants to get married. They've been together for 10 years. They own a business together. We see them with their clients. We see them with their families. We sort of see them going through this journey together, and as human beings first and foremost. And I think what I love about the film is that it normalizes these people.
Yeah.
And it's just a very human story about people wanting just to be able to do what everyone else does.
Yeah.
And just sort of have their love recognized and sanctioned by society so they can celebrate with their friends and family. So I think it's something which on some level we all want. So I would definitely recommend the film.
Yeah, I love especially when he tells, one of them tells how they met and how he sent a beer to him, and the guy rejected it. I mean, things that are so, that it happens to a lot of people that, you know, when they look back and after 25 years of a relationship, you say, hey, that's how we met and that's how it happened. And it almost didn't, but then it did. And so I think that is very important, to see that same-sex couples can contribute to society as anybody else, and they have backstories that are as irrelevant or at the same time as trivial as anybody else.
He actually has, I think he had to send the beer over twice to finally get through. Finally get it accepted. And it was just a very sort of a story like anybody else could have met, or anyone else, you know, could have been persistent in wooing someone. And it's just sort of a nice human story showing these people as people. And I think if, you know, fans of documentaries, and I think if you're a friend or an ally of the LGBTQ community, I think it's a heartwarming story. You know, whoever you are on the social or political spectrum. So I would definitely recommend the film.
Well, and I thank you immensely for joining us for the screening, for the Q&A, and for this second opportunity to the Q&A due to technical difficulties the first time. Thank you so much for giving us some part of your time in this collaboration. And well, maybe there will be another movie that you want to join us. We do it every other Wednesday, and
Okay, I would love
we
to.
have different issues that relate to the Spanish and Latino communities. So,
Okay.
Dr. Salvatore, thank you so much.
Thank you. Stay well.
You too.
I don't know. I don't see any questions in the chat. I guess that's a great generous offer to email questions to Professor Salvatore if you have any. And if nobody has any more, maybe we will let him go on with his evening.
Yes, and
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salvatore, for this fantastic participation. I think it's very enlightening, and we should all consider all the issues that we discussed today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cameron, for taking over, and see you next time.
Thank you.